Good morning, everybody. We assemble on this platform in the presence of our Christ, who says to each of us, "Come unto me, all ye who bear heavy loads, and I will give you rest." Our Christ is the healing Christ, and he uses different persons in this ministry of healing to touch us deeply, to renew us, to restore us, and to reposition us in a life of peace and joy. Let us go to God in prayer. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, this is a new day, and we rejoice in your numberless blessings. In you we live, in you we move, in you we have our being. Lord, we live in challenging and changing times and are surrounded with so many men, women, boys, and girls who have suffered emotional damage or are going through emotional turmoil. Lord, you know everyone who is in need of emotional healing and the hurt and the pain that they are going through. And we ask now that you meet each one at their own point of need. May they find their strength, their support, their comfort, and their hope in the Lord Jesus Christ. Refresh those that are weary, strengthen those that are weak, help the afflicted, deliver the needy, comfort the sorrowing, heal those that are hurting, and draw very close to all those who are in need of emotional renewal. As we meet like this today, guide all our presenters and our interactions. We pray all these things in and through the name of Jesus Christ, our Lord and our Savior. Amen and amen. Professor Pottinger will do the official welcome at this time.
Thanks, Reverend Carlisle, for blessing the proceedings this morning. And thank you to Miss Ashley Boyne for her soul-stirring rendition of Memories on the Violin. Welcome everyone to this seminar put on by the Church-Site Counselling Initiative in partnership with Webster Memorial United Church. I am Audrey Pottinger, a clinical psychologist and the coordinator of this symposium. And I thank you all for joining. And a special welcome to those who are our repeat attenders, those who have attended a CSCI seminar or workshop before. For our first timers, the Church-Site Counselling Initiative was founded in 2015 with 5 sites. The initiative is a partnership between mental health professionals and several church denominations. So for example, the United Church of Jamaica and Cayman Islands, one of the denominations, supports 2 sites, and one is Webster Church, who's partnering with us today. A key outcome of this church practitioner partnership is that it has made psychological counseling more readily available and accessible to those who cannot afford private counseling. Additionally, every year, the CSCI team of counselors volunteer their time and skills biannually to offer free educational sessions on mental health, such as today's symposium. We currently have 3 sites active, 2 in Kingston and St. Andrew and 1 in Mandeville. We're hoping to resume service at our 2 other sites located in Spanish Town and Montego Bay. Our mission statement, which seeks to address societal concerns, is taking a stance for healthy relationships, parenting, and family life. Enough about CSCI. So this morning we have an exciting symposium lined up for you. Over the next 2.5 hours or so, we will be looking at emotional woundedness and how to better understand emotional wounds in ourselves and others. So this morning we want you, whether you're a parent, an employee or employer, a service provider, a church leader, or you hold no job or post and have been feeling alienated or are alienated by society, to pause with us and examine emotional woundedness, whether in ourselves or in someone we care about. Lots of people have been talking about the COVID pandemic and how it's affecting mental health. But what about the crime pandemic that has been going on long before COVID? How has that been affecting our mental health here in Jamaica? Being emotionally wounded from witnessing or experiencing trauma and loss through crime and violence may help to explain an overreaction to something your coworker said or a church member. When we give a knee-jerk response, it can be because of past pain, anxiety, or woundedness. And some of us may try real hard to hide being wounded, but often the memories of the trauma keep triggering us and make it difficult to either hide it or move on. So we have a couple of presentations lined up for you. We begin by examining one of the common causes of emotional wounds in Jamaica from different sources of trauma and loss in the society. So this session will be followed by one where we will look at how emotional wounds can literally affect our heart. We will then examine another key cause of emotional woundedness, and this time when the wounding began early in life during childhood and caused insecure attachments. And these insecure attachments could be from being left behind by a parent who migrated, or being abandoned, or being sexually abused by someone you trusted, etc. In the third and fourth sessions, respectively, we will explore two consequences of being wounded. Firstly, our ability to trust others, and secondly, how we parent, how we bring up our children, and our focus will be particularly on how we bring up our boys. In our final session, entitled Finding Our Oases, we look at ways to self-care and soothe the wounds in order to move forward. Now, by way of introducing our presenters, just a little bit about them. As I said earlier, I'm a psychologist, a licensed clinical psychologist, and the founder of CSCI, and a professor at the University of the West Indies and a consultant at the University Hospital. I will be facilitating the first session, which will then be followed by Dr. Lisa Herlock, a consultant cardiologist, and our guest presenter who graciously accepted the offer to join us this morning. Dr. Herlock is part of the care team at Premier Heart and Surgery Center in Kingston. We will also be hearing from our 3 professional counselors at the different CSCI sites. Ms. Nikisha Prasad, a licensed associate clinical psychologist who works full-time at the University of Technology, and she's the counselor at the Webster Memorial site in Halfway Tree. Mrs. Dinette Watson-Edwards, a licensed associate counseling psychologist, as well as a trained mental health nurse, and she's the counselor at Ridgemount United Church in Mandeville at their counseling site. And Ms. Sophie Mayer, associate counseling psychologist, full-time at the Ministry of Health and Wellness stationed in St. Thomas, and she's the CSCI counselor at East Queen Street Baptist in downtown. Now, one more thing before we start. After 2 years of virtual sessions due to COVID, we are mindful of the tension that can build up in our neck, shoulder, eyes when we focus on the virtual space for long. So after each presentation, we encourage you to stretch, roll your shoulders, shift your eyes from the screen before we begin the next session. Now let's begin. I do hope it's a rewarding morning for you. Again, thanks for joining. So I'm going to start the ball off with us looking at emotional wounds and unresolved traumatic grief. Now, there are many, well, actually, there are two. There are 2 primary ways that we can become emotionally wounded. One can be by a one-off traumatic event, such as a loss, particularly when the loss is unexpected and or violent and the grief is unresolved. The death of a loved one violently, by homicide, suicide, motor vehicle accident could qualify, or if you've been violently attacked, raped, kidnapped, etc. And then we also have wounds that are based on ongoing relentless pain or trauma that has not been addressed. And these could be from parental absence, from childhood sexual abuse, from childhood neglect, living in a violent community and witnessing violence regularly, or being in a long-term relationship that is a hurtful one, whether it is parent-child or spouse or friendship. And the abuse can be emotional, physical, sexual, financial, etc. Unfortunately, we have too many incidences of both types of causes occurring too often in our society. And worse, with no intervention, these traumatic wounds will be passed to the next generation. So I dare say that many of the cold-blooded and soulless murderers who are inflicting emotional wounds on society were likely emotionally wounded themselves, as they probably never had a chance of forming loving bonds with anyone. And we're not really a society that knows how to respond to emotional pain, particularly emotional pain in children. And so those children can carry emotional wounds into adulthood. Now, tragic events usually involve loss of some kind, and when the loss is accompanied by trauma, then the memories can cause such intense pain that it's difficult to process and grieve the loss. Instead, we try to move on without dealing with it, saying it's life, can't do nothing about it. Or we try to bury it deep, as man not be cried. Or some Christians will say it's God will, our lot in life, so we just need to move on. But trauma affects more than our mental health. Trauma can cause disconnection between the brain and the body. And particularly when trauma occurs in childhood, it can rewire the brain of children. For example, it impairs how well children can regulate their emotions. So we see a lot of our adolescents and young children being very aggressive and just having poor impulse control. Trauma can do that to the brain. It can also prevent logical responding and creativity and long-term planning, because those who have been affected by trauma live in a survival mode, live in the here and now. So they're not able to think down the road and plan long-term down the road, but yet they're expected to go back to the classroom after witnessing violence and murders, etc., in their communities. And they're expected to be able to reason logically and be creative and plan. Trauma is also linked to chronic health problems, mental illness, social and legal problems. And as I've been saying, trauma results in children becoming adults who are emotionally wounded. Now, any society that has many traumatic loss events will produce citizens who are emotionally wounded. And those wounded can be anyone. It can be the ministers of government who are leading our country. It can be the doctor. It can be the church leader. It can be the teacher. Anyone can be wounded. And this is the diet. This is the diet of violence and trauma that we're fed constantly in the media. So domestic disputes resulting in murder, and sometimes murder and suicide, revenge killing by gang members, school children wounding each other, and the list goes on. In order to survive the constancy of traumatic events, as a society, what we tend to do is we disassociate, we detach, or we become desensitized. However, when we respond as such, when we detach, it is not helping us manage the trauma. In fact, even when we ignore trauma symptoms, cortisol, which is stress hormone, and adrenaline are still being released in the body and causing damage. So we're not protecting ourselves when we disassociate, when we detach. What desensitization does is it ramps up our violence anticipation. So we require more violence to elicit a reaction. So if the night news told us one died last night, nothing moves in us anymore. If they tell us 9, maybe there's a blip. So we anticipate more violence. That's what desensitization does. Desensitization also shuts down any active engagement. So we begin to feel that there is nothing we can do as we're only one person. So we just shut it down. We no longer care what happens as long as it doesn't impact us directly. So we become encapsulated in our personal world. Violence, unfortunately, is no longer perceived as traumatic, but a normal loss. to effectively manage trauma, gentle people, we need to stop detaching. And that's one of the reasons I started the CSCI, this initiative. I just felt I needed to take back some control from feeling helpless and hopeless about my country, and to feel as if I'm doing something to improve what is going on. And the good thing is that the counselors I work with in the CSCI share a similar vision of community service. Now I'm going to shift from the societal level and take it down to the individual level. What are some of the symptoms, the signs that we can see in ourselves and in those we know that could suggest woundedness from unresolved trauma? Firstly, when we are wounded, we view our world as unsafe. We're constantly tense, we're on alert, we're unable to relax. Can you imagine what that is doing physiologically and emotionally? We experience anxiety, panic attacks, stomach aches, sleep disturbance. Those are signs of unresolved trauma, or can be. Unresolved trauma also affects the quality of our relationship. So we no longer feel comfortable with closeness, with intimacy. We push people away. It also affects how we trust. So we just have difficult trusting others when we're wounded, and sometimes even trusting the decisions that we're making. Unresolved trauma can result in a pattern of us shutting down feelings, thinking, just shutting down because it's just too painful to recall. And so instead we engage in a life of partying, or we become workaholics to try and just not having to deal with the trauma. Trauma affects our concentration skills, our focus, because of the flashbacks, the memories, and just even the tension and the anxiety. We're not able to concentrate and focus as well. There is also the impulsive responding, like the hair trigger anger, the slightest little thing and we explode. We just blow off the handle. Reoccurring thoughts, whenever they occur, and it results in us feeling self-shamed, feeling hopeless, those can also be signs of unresolved trauma. I also want to highlight some medical consequences of unresolved trauma, or those who have been exposed to trauma. And in particular, there is one common diagnosis which became popular with US war veterans. And this is a diagnosis that is given because persons, when they are experiencing specific symptoms after a long time after the event, the traumatic event has ended, they're likely to require medication and therapy to help heal. Now, what was happening, what the US started seeing was that their war veterans and those who returned from a stint in war, their family members saw a marked change in their personality. They became very aggressive, very isolated and withdrawn, suicidal, they were killing themselves, homicidal, they were killing their loved ones and just going berserk. And so they started recognizing, and when they started examining these persons, that these war veterans were having flashbacks, memories. They felt as if they were still out there in the field fighting. They were on constant alert because they were either trying to dodge being killed or they were killing. And when we process that, we realize, how is that different from what our police force dealing with on a daily basis? Our policemen and women have to be dodging bullets, are killing, and the memories, the flashbacks, they must be enduring that as well. I really don't know if we are treating them for PTSD or even considering, when we see some of the aggressive behaviors, if we are looking at PTSD. Other medical consequences include physical health problems, but I'm not going to go into those that listed on the screen because Dr. Herlock, I'm sure, will address some of those in the next session. Now, I'm going to begin wrapping up my session by examining focusing, I should say, on 2 steps that we need to take if we are being wounded from trauma and we're trying to move forward into recovery. Step 1 is that grief needs to occur. Grieving allows us to heal, to remember with love rather than pain or anger or revenge. There's a lovely quote by Rachel Naomi Remen. Grief is a sorting process. One by one, you let go of things that are gone and you mourn for them. One by one, you take hold of the things that have become part of who you are and you build again. But I ask, how many men, how many of our inner city youths grieve? How many of them? And maybe a more pertinent question is, what is the opportunity for them to grieve with the back-to-back trauma that they're living in their community and a culture that says no to any form of emotion except anger? Persons who are emotionally wounded from traumatic grief will benefit from professional help to achieve healing grief. And my second and final point is reconnecting the mind and the body. How do we do this? This is important because, as I said earlier, trauma affects how our brains develop. And brain scans demonstrate this very clearly. Brain scans, the images demonstrate the difference between a healthy developing brain and a wounded brain. Now, to note, brain impacted by trauma doesn't shut down all areas of the functioning. Some areas will work fine, while others not. So we can be very successful educational-wise and career-wise, but we're unable to appropriately receive or show affection to those we love, even when we love them. So sometimes we are unaware, we are emotionally wounded because outwardly we look successful. When there is disconnection between the mind and the body, in order to recover, we need to get in touch with our feelings, our thoughts, our being to feel whole again. And we have to find ways, therefore, to soothe the wounds so we can reconnect. And in my final session for the morning, I'm going to come back again and we're going to look at some ways to care for self in order to soothe emotional wounds. So we're going to now prepare for the next presenter. And I'm reminding you, please stretch, roll your neck, avert your eyes as we prepare to listen to Dr. Herlock. Thank you.
In running, it is man against himself, the cruelest of opponents. The other runners are not the real enemies. His adversary lies within him, in his ability with brain and heart to master himself. That's a quotation from Glenn Cunningham, which I think is very relevant for our talk today. Good morning again. Thank you to all the, to Professor Pottinger and all the other organizers for allowing me to talk this morning about mental stress and the heart. Today, as a cardiologist, I will be speaking about the interaction between heart disease and stress. When I chose my postgraduate degree 20 years ago, it was supposed to be in cardiology. Little did I understand and realize that I would be spending so much time devoted to assessing the brain and the impact of stress on the function of the heart. The interaction between the heart and the brain is not just at a physical level, separated by their blood supply, but it is so much more. I will give you a few examples. So about 10 years ago, a 65-year-old female presented to the accident and emergency room. She was in a horrible argument with her husband while driving down through Junction from St. Mary. While arguing, she developed severe central chest pain associated with sweating, vomiting, nausea, shortness of breath. She presented to the emergency room. They did an ECG and found that her ECG was classic for a heart attack. Her blood pressure was elevated, her heart rate was high. We subsequently did an echocardiogram, which is an ultrasound of the heart, and this showed that the apex of her heart was just not moving. So in our mind, there had been some heart damage. We did her blood tests, which proved that there were abnormal heart cells in the blood, which indicates a heart attack. And so we started treatment for a heart attack. We subsequently looked at her blood vessels via a coronary angiogram, and we were quite surprised when her blood vessels were normal. So this patient is a classic case of a condition called the broken heart syndrome, or Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, as it was first described in Japan in 1990 by Sato et al. It is a condition that typically occurs in females, and it's the presence of severe emotional or physical stress, which leads to a presentation as if it's a heart attack. But when you look at the blood vessels are normal. There's no blockage there. And the key to making this diagnosis is after 4 weeks, the heart returns to absolute normal. We still don't understand the full mechanism behind this condition, but it's thought that the severe emotional stress stuns the heart and causes it not to move. And then over time, this returns to normal. So this is a dramatic impact of stress on the heart. Another example of stress on the heart is what happened a couple weeks ago in Texas. The husband, I don't know much about his medical history, but I know that the husband of one of the shooting victims was 50 years old. And 2 days after her death, he also died from a massive heart attack. Another example is what I see on the ward every day. On the ward, I note that patients who have a positive outlook and have a good family support system typically do much better and have a more favorable outcome than those who are negative and who don't have a support system at all. When I consent anybody for a procedure, I typically tell them, listen to me, if you're sad and depressed, that increases the chance of a bad outcome. So you better get happy, all right? Now, am I being overly dramatic with these patients? How do we explain all these phenomena? What happens when there is severe acute stress? What happens is that the body responds to acute stress in the typical fight, flight, fright mechanism, as if you're going to war. There is an increase in the heart rate, so there's basically activation of the sympathetic nervous system. The heart rate increases and the blood pressure increases as extra adrenaline and hormones are released throughout the body to help you to deal with this acute stress. Now, this is good if you're doing a 100-meter dash. However, over time or immediately, these stress hormones, which include cortisol and some fancy ones, the interleukins, the tuber necrosis factor, these are all good acutely, but they also trigger inflammation. Now, inflammation is what we think affects every organ in the body. And inflammation triggers damage to cells and organs. So we think about inflammation. For example, if you get a viral infection, your body becomes inflamed as it tries to fight this virus. But stress also triggers inflammation. So you have the heart beating fast, the blood pressure is high, the blood vessels are pumping hard, and all of these hormones and substances are racing through the body and causing this inflammation. So basically, in dramatic terms, it's like pus racing through your body when you're stressed. This cascade of substances in this stressful environment can trigger a heart attack. A heart attack is a sudden clot that blocks the blood vessels supplying the muscles in the heart. So patients present with chest pain, shortness of breath, a feeling of impending doom. But this blockage can lead to damage to the muscles of the heart and can lead to your subsequent death. If you are already vulnerable with conditions such as diabetes, hypertension, high cholesterol, if you're a smoker, if you're overweight, if you're old, and other chronic illnesses, example, previous COVID or acute COVID, all of these simply increase your risk of a heart attack. Of importance, the same process can happen in the blood vessels in the brain, which can cause a stroke. So you can understand what happens with sudden bad news and grief that would explain a sudden heart attack and a stroke. However, if we think about it, we can also understand what happens to someone who has chronic stress. So examples of chronic stressors are being at work in a stressful, sometimes toxic environment, or having just a very high demanding job all day. I see this, for example, in persons who work in the banking system in Jamaica. From the general bank tellers to the middle managers, they are all under severe stress, and I see them in office all the time. Or persons who, for example, have a stressful romantic relationship at home due to infidelity, financial issues, that also leads to chronic stress. Or in persons who, for example, are taking care of ailing loved ones, that causes immense stress. And I often see that the person who is ailing at home actually tends to do better than the person who is taking care of those who are ailing, right? Or persons having a difficult minor, somebody who is misbehaving and having to think about caring for them, thinking about trying to direct them in the right way. All of these can cause chronic stress. So these persons are similar to those with acute severe stress, but slower and smoldering. So you have an increased heart rate because of what's happening around you, but that heart rate remains up. You have an increased blood pressure, which initially goes up with acute stress and comes back down. But if you have chronic stress, that blood pressure will go up and continue to remain elevated, all right? So all those hormones that are released with acute stress remain elevated. So your cortisol level, which is called the stress hormone, remains elevated at all times. And these consequently cause damage, chronic damage. And we think about damage in the heart that can lead to hypertension. So these persons develop chronic hypertension. And as we know, hypertension increases your risk of having a heart attack, having a stroke, and having kidney disease. So you have the heart that is now pumping vigorously and fast at all times. And as the heart pumps vigorously and fast, it starts to dilate like a balloon. And as you know, as you dilate a balloon, as you stretch a balloon, the balloon gets weaker. So as your heart under chronic stress dilates and stretches, it becomes weaker and persons can develop heart failure. So the heart is now not able to do what it was supposed to do, and persons develop symptoms of heart failure. Also, as the heart dilates and pumps harder, patients also develop one of the common symptoms of stress, which is palpitations. Palpitations is basically being able to feel your heart beating, because typically you're sitting down listening to me, you're not feeling your heart beating. But somebody who's having palpitations will either start feeling their heart beating and feel an immense pressure on the chest as the heart beats, or the heart starts beating fast and they feel the heart racing or the heart irregular. So many patients who have chronic stress will therefore complain about irregular heartbeats or palpitations. These are all influenced by chronic stress. So I also note that patients who have chronic stress try to deal with this. And sometimes we try to deal with this in the incorrect manner. So we start smoking, right? We start smoking cigarettes and marijuana. We start taking cocaine, heroin, and alcohol to relieve the chronic stress symptoms. But as we all know, all of these, including overeating, binge eating when you're stressed, and just basically being inactive, sitting in front of the TV, not doing anything, all of these have their own individual negative effects on the heart and can cause strokes and heart failure. So this leads to the whole topic of having depression and anxiety. It has been established over the years that having depression and anxiety increases your likelihood of heart disease. Again, they similarly increase your heart rate, increase your blood pressure, and increase the release of these negative hormones that are initially supposed to help you, but over time cause damage to the different organs in your body. A small study published in the West Indian Medical Journal in 2012 by Professor Roger Gibson et al. Revealed that 30% of the cardiac patients at the university hospital are also suffering from depression. A new and emerging condition that I've seen in my office is the whole concept of health anxiety, in which patients present with a myriad of complaints, such as chest pain, palpitations, shortness of breath. So these are patients who are stressed because of what's happening around them. They see persons getting ill. And this, I think, has come about even more so since the COVID pandemic. They see persons around them who have become ill. They see persons who have died from COVID. They see persons who have had heart disease, and they come to you with all of the symptoms, chest pain, palpitations, and with thorough testing, we can't find an underlying condition. And so we have gotten this whole concept of health anxiety as another problem that we have to deal with. So now that we have established the strong link between stress and heart disease, what can we do to prevent this or to alleviate some of these issues? Well, one of the first things I think that we need to do is to set priorities in our life, in our work-life balance. We need to understand what is important. So we need to understand that our health is important, our family is important, and that our work is important, but it cannot be at the detriment of our health and our family life. We need to find some way to be happy. Praying and fellowship works. Praying, and basically we're saying, stop worrying about it. Leave it all to God, right? And by having that outlook, we can release some of our anxiety and stressors and just live. Exercise is known to be an excellent way of relieving stress. It helps to relieve stress mentally and physically. It helps to strengthen the heart, the muscles, and the joints. And also, Spending time with the loved ones. So I'm not necessarily saying family members, because sometimes they can be the source of our stressors, and we need to understand and realize that. But spend time with people you love and will make you happy. As I said, being happy helps to improve your heart rate and your blood pressure. Adopt a positive outlook. So I tell persons that, listen, if worrying will change your circumstance, then by all means, go ahead and worry. But guess what? It probably won't. So guess what? Worrying makes you feel terrible. So therefore, just have a positive outlook and leave and hand it over to Jesus. Other methods that can be used to relax you include more yoga, meditation, and mindfulness, learning breathing exercises that, yes, you have to go to work, but during periods of intense stress, you stop, you close your eyes, you take deep breaths, and you just relax. And by learning to do that, you actually learn to lower your heart rate and lower your blood pressure while in a stressful situation. And of course, we cannot forget proper sleep. So sleep time is important, and for the heart and the entire body to regenerate. Brain cells regenerate during sleep. So lack of sleep increases those negative hormones, increases our adrenaline, increases our cortisol, and causes continuous damage. Now, I've mentioned this in terms of heart disease, but the same mechanism, the same inflammation, the same attack on your immune system that goes off balance also increases your risk of cancers, right? So we have to know that controlling your risk, controlling your stress levels will end up improving your outcome long-term, improving and reducing the risk of heart disease and reducing the risk of other chronic illnesses. Thank you very much.
So good morning again, everyone. Today, I'll be speaking to you about emotional wounds with specific focus on insecure attachment in childhood. Now, just before we begin, I have a short video. And in this video, I want you to just pay close attention, because I'm sure we would have seen some of these clips on the news, in the Gleaner, and we would have asked ourselves, like, how come? How can persons commit these acts? How can persons do this? And to answer this question is that persons who are emotionally wounded, they hurt others. So just pay close attention.
And I said these are some serious times. All I can see around us is just violence and crime. Full time for us to centralize, socialize, and realize. So let the sun shine throughout every day. Let the moon shine through the peaceful nights. This is 7 times rise and 7 times fall, but I don't really believe in the falling things at all. Cause life continues as it goes. If you really want to know the truth of the truth isn't being told.
So the video is just highlighting to you the different ways that we can be emotionally wounded. And to just start off with a basic definition, since I'll be speaking to you on insecure attachments from childhood, it's important for us to understand what it means. So when we talk about attachments, what we're referring to that deep, enduring emotional bond that we might have, or that deep emotional bond between a caregiver or a parent and a child, which is formed as a result of a caregiver's sensitivity and responsiveness to a child's needs. Now, to just put it very simply, it is just saying that this attachment or this bond comes about when our parents or our caregivers when it is that they meet our needs, whether these needs are emotional or physical needs, right? So based on this attachment, it may affect the type of attachment that we have. And interestingly, the quality of early attachment, it is so critical in influencing the type of adults that we become, as well as the quality of relationships that we have. So early attachments are very, very important. Now, unfortunately, not many individuals actually experience secure attachment early in life. And when we talk about secure attachment, what we're referring to is that healthy bond between a parent and a child when they meet their emotional needs. Now, if it is that this need is not met, what happens is that the child will have insecure attachments. Now, insecure attachments is that unhealthy attachment between the parent and the child that develops from the parent being unavailable. When we talk about unavailable, this may be a parent who is overseas working, so they're not physically present with the child, or maybe the parents are there, but they're not meeting the child's emotional needs. Maybe it's a case where parents are inconsistent. 1 minute they're loving and treating the child with care and affection, and then the next minute they're just very harsh. Or maybe it's a case where they're just very insensitive. And sometimes this may present in verbal, physical, or even sexual abuse. And so these things all contribute to insecure attachments being formed. Now, with that happening, what this is doing is that it's teaching the child from very early that, guess what? Your emotions and your needs, they will not be recognized by others, and they will not be supported and loved. And they're teaching the children that, guess what? People cannot be trusted. This can therefore lead to questioning of one's self-worth. Maybe it's a case where the child is, or the adult, they reach a place where they're just craving external validation. And that is why we see so many of our youths just becoming a part of gangs from very early. Or maybe it's a case, even us as adults, we join cults because we have that yearning and we have that desire to just belong. Also, what may happen as a result of insecure attachment is that we may grow into adults who fear abandonment, and we may also have unfulfilling and unhealthy relationships. Now, unfortunately, insecure attachment, it presents itself predominantly in our intimate relationships. And so I'll be focusing specifically on that. Now, we may ask the question, how does early childhood insecure attachment, how can that affect our intimate relationships? Well, the answer to that question is that it may affect it in many different ways. And one of those ways is that when we become involved in our intimate relationships, we may have a fear of dependency on others. This occurs when parents fail to meet their child's needs during childhood. And the child learns that they cannot trust their caregivers, and by extension, they cannot be there for them. And so that is how these emotional wounds form, because they're learning that, listen, my parents, they're not going to be here. They weren't here, and I can't trust anybody. Now, when we take that hurt and that emotional wound and we enter into these intimate relationships, now we become so reluctant to rely on our partners, whether it is for emotional or financial support, because we are just anticipating that these partners, they're going to disappoint us, right? Not only that, these persons who are emotionally wounded, they may take complete financial and our household responsibility. They may take on that completely. And so what happens is that they get so involved in taking care of all of these responsibilities that persons, in essence, take advantage of them. Now, as I proceed, I want you to just really reflect. Just think about these things. Is that you? Are you emotionally wounded? Do you present like this in your intimate relationships? Is your partner presenting like this also? Another consequence of early childhood insecure attachments, which cause us to be emotionally wounded, is that we may grow into adults who need a lot of space or time for ourselves. So growing up in a chaotic or unpredictable environment, it creates a lot of stress for the child. And often leave them just highly anxious, as the child is left so uncertain and fearful of what to expect from others. Now, as adults, they need a lot of time for themselves in order to calm these symptoms of anxiety and fear. And so they may distance themselves from their partner during stressful situations. And you may ask, but this is not necessarily a bad thing. If it is, you're going to separate from your partner for a little bit, but the problem occurs if it is you do not return to resolve the conflict. Additionally, these persons who are emotionally wounded due to insecure attachments, they may be persons who are just constantly fighting, and they may not know how to repair these fights after an argument may occur. Now, when children grow up in an environment where parents were always arguing or always fighting, they often do not know, or they often do not learn the necessary skills to have productive and healthy communication. And they, in turn, will model their parents' behavior in their relationships as adults. So in the relationship, these are persons who are just always looking for something to fight about. They're always picking fights. So they may think that, listen, if we're not fighting, then it means there's no love, because this is how they would have learned to communicate. When couples do not learn how to have productive and healthy management of conflict, they also do not know how to repair a relationship after a conflict. Now, after a fight, a partner may just return and just pretend like nothing happened. Or maybe these are the persons who have difficulty compromising, and they may resort to just treating their partner, or just giving their partner the silent treatment. Are you that person? Now, another consequence is that these persons who are emotionally wounded, they may have serial relationships, they may have a fear of commitment, or in some instances, they may just settle. Now, children who had unreliable caregivers, or caregivers who abandoned them, whether they went away, whether they were just not there for them, whether they abused them, they grow up to become distrustful adults who are fearful of being hurt or being alone. And so they constantly seek validation from their partners to prove that they are worthy of love. And so each new relationship will just represent that new hope that they're going to get that love that they're so longing for, which in turn leads to them having serial partners, or just getting involved in multiple relationships. Additionally, that's not the only consequence. You have persons who may have a fear of commitment, and they may probably enter a relationship, but because they're entering with one foot in and one foot out, they may sometimes end the relationship prematurely, or in some instances, they just have very surface or shallow relationships. The minute the relationship starts to get a little bit serious, they're just looking for a reason to just leave the relationship, because they have that need for freedom, right? So they want to be able to be free so that they can leave whenever they want, because they have that fear of being hurt. Additionally, in relationships, you may have persons who settle and they have difficulty leaving toxic relationships. They feel that staying with someone who is not a good fit is safer than being alone. They may feel that no one else will love them other than the current partner that they have, who sometimes may be abusive or just unfaithful. So in essence, they will stay in unhealthy relationships because they feel like nobody else will love them. And finally, these persons who are emotionally wounded, they may have these fears of abandonment. Now, children who are neglected or abandoned by a caregiver, they often struggle with fears of abandonment in intimate relationships due to the emotional wounds that were caused by loss, whether these emotional wounds came about because of just being emotionally unavailable or just physically absent. Now, as adults, they are insecure in their relationships, and these are the persons who tend to be extremely jealous, demanding, and possessive. So if it is you're in a relationship, maybe they want to know what time you're going, what time you're going out, when are you going to return, who are you talking to on the phone. They don't want you to talk to anybody else, right? So research has actually shown that these are common traits among offenders of intimate partner homicide suicide. That was based on findings from a 10-year archival data review that was conducted in Jamaica by Pottinger et al. 2019. It was also found that these cases result from victims threatening to leave the relationships. And we hear those cases very often on the news. The minute a partner expresses that they want to leave the relationship, then in some instances, the partner will go ahead and they will kill the partner and then kill themselves afterwards. So we understand just how serious these implications are. So these early childhood insecure attachment, these wounds, they manifest, and it does take a toll on our intimate relationships. Now, having understood just the impact of how these wounds can manifest in our relationships, if it is you're dating someone, I'll encourage you to try to find out how that person was raised. A lot of persons, they weren't raised in love. They were raised on survival. And that is why you see so many men and women not being able to love properly, because they're emotionally wounded. You'll find a lot of good-looking people damaged inside because of their past, and you won't realize how damaged they are until you try to love them. If you think a person's past doesn't affect how they see life, then you're sadly mistaken, because guess what? Hurting people hurt people. And so, in closing, I just want you to just bear this in mind. Parents have a very, very important role to play. So the ways in which parents, or the way in which we interact as caregivers with our children, it shapes their sense of self, as well as the way they communicate and how they form relationships. Unless we do the work to develop more self-awareness of our behavior, we will repeat the insecure patterns of attachment in adulthood. Do not be afraid to seek professional help to heal from these emotional wounds. So let us start our healing process today. So you have come to the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening. Remember, this time, if you need to stretch, just roll your shoulders, whatever you need to do to just feel refreshed, I ask you to do so as you prepare for our next presenter.
Good morning, everyone. I am Deanette Watson-Edwards. I'm from the Ridgemount Church-Site Counselling Initiative. And this morning, it is my pleasure to share with you on the theme, understanding emotional wounds in self and others and its impact on trust. Now, there are many different impacts of emotional wounds, but we saw it fit to focus on trust because trust is very important for our internal harmony and positive social functioning. It is the foundation of most healthy relationships. Now, psychologists have noticed within the last 10 years or so that there has been an unprecedented rise in trust issues more than ever. And so we ask this question: why is it so easily shaken now more than ever? And it is found out that we are hearing more about trust issues because of the advance in technology. Now, persons are able to be more deceptive. They can hide things. Partners can be together in a room and one person is carrying on with another person on their phone. They're able to hide messages, emails, and that sort of a thing. It's also on the flip side that because of technology, we are more aware of what is happening to each other. People are posting about their challenges and they're seeking responses from others. People create blogs and vlogs about their issues. So everything is out there, and we are more aware now of trust issues that's happening around us. And so I would ask this question this morning. What is the trust level like in your work environment? Those of us who are church members, what is trust like among members in the church, in the family, and most importantly, in our intimate relationship? What is important is that lacking trust or mistrusting is one of the main consequences of being emotionally wounded. And so as we talk about trust this morning, let's look at a definition, so that we're on the same page as we talk about trust. It is seen as a central part of all human relationships. It is critical in developing that secure, intimate, and satisfying relationships. It gives confidence and security and carries that belief that you can depend on a person or on a relationship in times of needs. And when there is trust, partners, friends, families, co-workers, church family, we're all seen as being reliable and predictable. Now, how do we first start developing trust? Psychologists say that trust is a normal developmental goal that infants seek to achieve. So infants who are raised by adults who respond consistently in meeting their needs, these parents, they are warm, they are affectionate. They make sure that their babies are fed when they need to. They make sure that the babies are changed so they're comfortable, and they try to develop that emotional bond with them. And psychologists say that by the end of the first year, when this takes place, then children, they have started to develop in trust. The previous presenter, Ms. Pastor, she spoke about secure attachments. And this is also very important for the development of trust, that children need to have that secure attachment to their parents, caregivers, significant others, for them to develop psychologically healthy. A critical factor then is the ratio of trust to mistrust experience for that young child. That will determine the level of trust they will develop as they grow and mature. There are some experiences that would lead children to develop mistrust, and some of them were discussed already. And so I will just quickly give an overview. It says that inconsistent responding of parents. Some parents who are young, who are uninformed and ignorant. Some are stressed with all the stresses of life. And so they do not really pay attention and make sure that their children are getting the nurturing that they need. And so when there's a failure in this, mistrust starts to develop in that child. It was mentioned already of parental migration, that when that is parents leave children, of course they will send material things, but that is not enough. And I can remember a story that I would hear from a friend of mine with her daughter after her husband would have died, and she went away to seek funding now to help with her daughter's education. And the daughter was left alone, and she was doing CAPE, and she didn't do well. She failed miserably because of the loss and trauma of her father's death, but also now the absence of her mother. And she said, "Mom, you need to come home. We will write this through together because your presence is very important to me succeeding." So the presence of parents is very important for them children to develop trust. A betrayal of trust also occurs when our children are sexually abused, when there is chronic physical abuse and verbal abuse. Sometimes our parents just lash out at our children and they will say harsh things to them. And, you know, this shakes the child world. Where this come from? Sometimes it's very frightening to them when this happens and they do not understand. And parents sometimes, respond dishonestly to their partners and respond dishonestly to their children. And so there's a mixed message. The words are saying one thing, but the actions are different. And this creates confusion for the children. And so where is the trust in that? Mom says one thing, mom promises this, dad promises this, but they never fulfill their promises. And they carry this with them, for a long time. Now, childhood experiences, when these negative experiences happens, it results in adults who are emotionally wounded, and it impacts their communication, how they relate to others, and their socializing skills. Outside of childhood, there are other factors that also lead to mistrust. And Professor Pottinger, she went into detail with grief and trauma and just all the things that are happening in our country now. We just cannot get a break. Trauma after trauma, the crime and the violence, the things that is happening at the governmental level. People are not trusting authority figures in our country. They don't trust the health system. And just as recently with COVID and, taking the vaccine, and most people did not want to take the vaccine because they just do not have that level of trust in the authority figures. Some people do not trust the police, and some people, they go through significant financial losses because of sometimes scamming, sometimes through the bank system again. And so, we are faced with all these stressors on a daily basis that after a while, we just don't trust each other anymore, right? Adolescents who are growing up, right? They face rejection. They face rejection at school, in the home, outside of the home. And so these things take a toll on them. And there is bullying also that affects their ability to trust. I just want to look at romantic relationship. Miss Passage, she did an awesome job just now by looking at that. But trust is thought of as glue that holds a relationship together because it facilitates that positive emotional connection between partners and within the family. And when that is absent from childhood, the child did not learn how to trust. No one was there for them. That secure attachment that was mentioned before is not there. Now they have come into a relationship. How do they maneuver this new space? And so even when their partner with the best of intention is giving them all the love and all the kindness and all the care, they can't appreciate it. They don't understand it. They don't know what it means because that was not developed in childhood. So when the mistrust begins in childhood, it makes it difficult to bounce back from later experiences of mistrust that we would face on a daily basis. So just as how there are consequences of emotional wounds, and trust being one of them, trust also has consequences. It hinders our progress from generally becoming. And when I say becoming who we are really meant to be. Some persons, because we don't trust, we cannot achieve our full potential. Because trusting means that we have to depend on other people. We need relationships to be able to make progress in this world. And if we lock ourselves away, then it hinders our success generally. It also causes us to build a system of defenses against our pain, the confusion, and the delusionment that we experience. You see, when children are faced with so many traumatic events, it creates that emotional hidden scar in them that they carry for a long time. And as was said before, no one cares for me. I am in this all by myself, so I have to protect myself. And let's look at what these protective defenses look like. Some persons practice heightened suspiciousness. They determine not to be sucked in. They said, I don't want to be sucked into that vacuum. And so they are very hypervigilant. There's just no relaxing. They question everything, right? Because is this true? You know, how can I believe this person? They view people from a skewed perspective. They don't keep close friends. They say, oh, so how she's so nice? You know, no, sir. Me not trust her. And this is how, you know, they would behave. They develop harsh, cynical attitudes towards others and life in general. They have these negative beliefs about other people, even when people are just trying to be helpful and kind, but they cannot see it that way. And so they vow never to trust anyone. They will close others out. It's like they build this wall around themselves and no one gets in, right? As I would hear my teenagers. So even the children, they start to build these protective defenses, the teenagers, and it develops into adulthood. You know, my teenager would say, I hurt them before they hurt me. I am not giving them the chance to do this to me again. So she will say really nasty things to them, you know, just to keep them away. When the foundation of not trusting is set in childhood, it makes it easier for us to feel insecure in our relationships, you know, with our family, at work, and even at church. We doubt ourselves or we lose trust in our own judgment and we succumb to stress or anxiety-provoking experiences. Some persons find it very hard to make decisions. They socially withdraw from group affiliations at the slightest perceived criticism. Sometimes it's not even a criticism, but they perceive it as that. And so they withdraw quickly. They take themselves away. You know what? I don't have any time for this, right? Because somehow, whatever is going on in the present sends a trigger to the past. And it's like they are in the present, but they're still fighting what happened in the past. And so these persons, they believe in their own invulnerability. Myself and I, you know, yeah, I don't trust you, right? And so they build up this invincibility and this strength about themselves. And what it does is that sometimes it is self-defeating, self-sabotaging, because as I said, we need people to progress in this world. And so some persons believe that they're not deserving of love when they have these trust issues. They don't believe that God loves them or they deserve God's love. And some of them don't even believe in God. And I've heard that many times, because where was God when this was happening to me? How did God not answer my questions? Why? Why didn't he do this? So there's no God. I just trust myself and believe in myself. And that's how they view it. Now, as I have shared, I have brought that awareness of the connection of trust, between trust and our emotional wounds. And so, you know, is this how we want to continue living our lives? Locked away where there's no air, no ventilation, no life behind these walls? Or do we want to step out and see, you know, what else is there? How can I move on from this? So how can we regain trust if we want to? We can take some time to do some introspection, some soul searching around the fears that we have and those insecurities that we have. And is this how we want to continue? We can make that decision to let go. We can speak to our pastor or minister or clergy, because trust is a very important concept in the life of a Christian. We can also seek the help of a professional, and most times that is what is needed to deal with those traumatic events that we have experienced as children or through the life cycle. And so, as I close, I just want to remind you that trust is very important. It is the glue that holds relationships together, basically holds the world together. We need it for success in our spiritual growth, communications, work, and healthy relationships. I thank you for listening. And remember, you are to give your eyes a rest, stretch, and be prepared for the next presenter. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Edwards, for that wonderful presentation. And I just want to say to all the persons that have joined us today, thank you so much for your time. And we trust that thus far you have been empowered by the presentations that we have been making. All right, so we continue to speak about emotional wounds, and my presentation will be looking specifically at shaping our boys and minimizing the impact of emotional wounds. Aren't our boys lovely? Some persons might say, what are you talking about? Boys? Yes, boys. They are lovely. So the building block of any society is the family. And healthy families equals a healthy society, right? Now, a sure way of averting an emotionally wounded society is via the vehicle of good parenting. And I know that there has been a lot of talk about parenting, what's happening in our society. And so we have to focus a lot of times on good parenting. Now, many of us have become very concerned over the level of crime and violence in our society, with a large percentage of these crimes being committed by males who often have been emotionally wounded. And we have been saying that since we started this symposium. So while we acknowledge that our girls are being emotionally wounded, the focus today will be on raising our boys to minimize the occurrence of emotional wounds. So the aim, therefore, of this presentation is really twofold. It is to sensitize caretakers of our boys that, who can become emotionally wounded, that many of our boys are emotionally wounded. And secondly, we want to reflect on how, as caregivers who have themselves been emotionally wounded, what impact that can have on how they interact with boys. So when we talk about parenting, when we talk about raising our children, by way of definition, it is a process of promoting and supporting the physical, emotional, social, spiritual, and intellectual development of a child from infancy to adulthood, to enable him or her to make a positive contribution to society. I know that's a mouthful, but I just want us to take real key note of this. Do you see how many elements are there? Physical, emotional, social, spiritual, and intellectual. And then let's look at the span of time. It is from infancy to adulthood. And so many times, unfortunately, for a lot of parents with boys, once some of the boys begin to get into their teen years, it's almost as if the parenting has stopped. But not only that, we have to recognize that there is a purpose to parenting. And the purpose is to help that child to make a positive contribution to society. Because if they're not making that positive contribution, we're going to see the negative effects. And many times with the crime and violence, that is what we're seeing. Negative contribution to society. So as we continue to speak about parenting, there's a theorist by the name of Abraham Maslow. And he was looking at the needs of individuals. And what he said in his theory is that we need to satisfy the basic needs of individuals first. So as we look at raising our children, we are agreeing that we need to satisfy their basic needs. So we need to ensure that they're being clothed. We need to ensure that there is food on the table. We need to ensure that there is a roof over their head, that they're safe and they have access to medical care. So that is absolutely important. And as we talk about our boys, it's very important that our boys experience their basic needs being met. However, many times what happens is that parents are satisfied and believe that they have done an awesome job if they're able to do this, not recognizing that these are just the basic needs that they have met and that there are other needs that need to be met. And so we're talking, for example, about their psychological needs, their emotional needs, their spiritual needs. And when we look at that, we are talking about feeling that sense of belonging to the family, that sense of love and nurture. In other words, that feeling that says, I wanted you, I want you, and I love you. You are important. You matter to me, right? And also, it is our responsibility as parents to build up their self-esteem, to let them know that, look, you are so great, you are awesome, right? And, you know, in Jamaican parlance, you know, we would say you are the best thing since sliced bread. We need to be the ones building up the self-esteem of our boys. Because the truth is, many times when they're out there, other persons are tearing them down. So as parents, that is a part of our function to build up their self-esteem. And then Maslow goes on to say that if we're able to fulfill the basic needs and the psychological needs, then we are able, that child will experience self-actualization, meaning they're able to fulfill their God-given potential. They're able to do their best. They're able to be the best that they were created to be, because we keep on building on the foundation, and this is how they'll be able to fulfill their potential. So again, because our focus is on our boys, you know, the question arises then, is there a difference in the genders in terms of, are there differences with girls and boys? And so we're seeing today that while parenting styles and socialization can create differences in how boys and girls develop their emotional skills, we're also saying that studies suggest that there are unique differences biologically as well. So it's twofold. It is biological, but it's also based on our parenting styles and how we socialize our boys. That's going to make the difference. So what have the researchers found? They have found, for example, that up to about age 3, girls respond more readily to human voices and faces, which has significance for attachment. So one of our previous presenters spoke about, attachment and how important that is. So can you imagine that if it is that our girls are going to be responding more favorably to the human voices and faces, then it's going to be easier for our parents to attach to the girls. We also find that in childhood, boys are more likely to have conduct problems, such as defiance and aggression, which are often associated with very high levels of anger, which if we don't understand this, it can lead to a response of aggression from caregivers. And I thought that this was very interesting. Very interesting to note that in early childhood, the boys tend to have a higher level of arousal and easier to get angry. And if we're not careful and if we don't understand this as parents and try to redirect the anger, redirect that energy and that arousal, then we are going to respond aggressively to them and the cycle is going to continue, right? So we need to be aware of that. They also found that language ability on average in girls is greater than boys, which can foster greater relational connectivity. And this is mainly in early childhood, because they do say that as girls and boys grow, that the playing field begins to level out. But remember, what happens within the first 5 years, for example, is critical for children in general. So if we're not understanding the differences and adjusting ourselves accordingly, we can be in for serious problems. All right. Now, one of the things that we recognize is that there are lots of messages that are being passed on to our boys as they are being raised. And I want to make it clear that boys and girls as well, but boys we're talking about today, are not raised only by parents. You know the saying that says it takes a village to raise a child. And so our boys are being raised by their parents, but they're also being raised by the mass media, culture, the teacher, other persons in the community, whether it's actively being done or not. But these messages are impacting our boys. So for example, some of the messages they hear, men should be confident and in control at all times. A man who does not fight back is weak. No matter nobody lick you, no matter nobody hurt you. Men must be strong. And what does strength means? Don't cry. Don't show fear or weakness. Solve your problems alone. Don't you dare ask for help. Right? And then we say to our boys, don't act like a girl. And how do the girls act? What are we saying? We're saying that if we see in our boys that they're soft-natured, if we see in the boys that they are expressive and they are verbal and they talk, we're saying to our boys, you're acting like a girl. You shouldn't be acting that way. We say to them, big boys, don't cry. Essentially what we're doing here is shutting down their emotions. So from a very early age, we have taught our boys that if they receive an emotional wound, they are not to cry, they're not to show that emotion, they're not to express themselves. In fact, it's okay for them to express the anger, but don't express sadness, right? And what we have done, shut down their emotions. And of course, a real man is successful with the ladies. Y'all in a bungle. These are some of the messages that our boys have been hearing. And so based on these stereotypes, boys often learn not to express their emotions, except for anger, making it difficult for us to know when they are emotionally wounded. Our boys have experienced trauma, right? And hardship. And so sometimes, as I said before, no attention is paid to their emotional development and their self-esteem as per what Maslow says in his theory. Many of our boys take on adult roles while still being a child because of financial problems. Sometimes absence of a father in the home make it seem as if the boy must become a man before he's emotionally ready to do so. And we see, for example, our boys on the street wiping the glasses, right? Wiping wheelchairs because they need to support families. Our boys are exposed to verbal, emotional, physical, sexual abuse and neglect. And in many instances, these various types of abuse experienced by our boys, they lead to emotional wounds. And what we find is that the caregivers have been emotionally wounded themselves. And as our previous presenter said, hurting people hurt. So therefore, how can we help our boys? What can we do to help them? How can we raise our boys to minimize them being emotionally wounded? So I would like to say to parents and to caregivers and to caretakers that we need to model how to share difficult feelings in healthy ways. We should be willing to talk about our own uncertainties, our own disappointments, and even our own past experiences as a child. Imagine a male being able to share with a boy how he had experienced disappointments, how he was uncertain about his own life, sharing with that boy his own personal experience so that that boy can see that it's okay for men to share their feelings. We need to ensure that we validate feelings expressed by the boys and encourage them to share. And this can be done while doing activities such as playing a game, kicking ball, walking. Our boys like to interact. They have high energy. And so while they're engaged in these things, that's a good time to see if we can get them talking. Our educators, for example, need to change the script that boys are difficult, right? Rather, educators can view their energy positively and creatively. And that is why it's important in the school system and outside as well that we channel our boys into extracurricular activities. So the football, the cricket, all these various sports, athletics, track, Boy Scouts, these things are very important for them to channel them and allow them to be able to express themselves. We need to ensure that our mass media, and this is such a point that we need to know the call to action to say that our songs need to instill positive messages about gender roles and masculinity, right? We need to change the script in our songs. Something needs to be done about it. Can we do something about that? Our church leaders, we need to create that environment where boys feel safe to express themselves. And we must ensure that we are confidential. Don't betray their trust. Don't tell anybody else what they have shared with you unless it is a case where you have to because of, for example, them wanting to commit suicide or something like that. Caregivers, caretakers, we need to seek help for our own unresolved issues and emotional wounds so that we can avoid verbal, emotional, physical, and sexual abuse of our boys. Thank you very much.
Well, so far we have had a feast of presentations and we've had such glorious information coming at us. A lot has been said this morning and we have a few questions, and what I will do is go through the questions in the order that the presentations were done. And I'll start with Professor Pottinger. One of the questions asked was, this generation seems more sensitive to stress and embarrassment, unlike previous generations. Is that because of excessive exposure to trauma globally through social media, or is it that older generations have not dealt with their own trauma and have just pushed through their own physical and emotional trauma that they have been exposed to?
All right, thanks for the question. It's a good one. I dare say there are several explanations, and you have hit on two. I also believe, though, that our children are becoming a lot more emotionally aware, whether it is through social media, cable, etc. So they are tuned in a lot more than their parents' generations about emotional hurt and emotional pain, etc. And because of that, then it may heighten their sensitivity to the trauma, the wounds, etc., that the person asked about. Yes, it could also be that their caregivers, not just parents, teachers, the village in their lives, may not know how to handle those questions, because we still are trailing the thought that children should be seen and not heard. It's improving, but it's still there. We're still trailing it. We're still carrying it. And so when children raise those sort of questions and speak to their emotional pain, they are still being shut down by the village caregivers in their lives, who are saying that, well, what can you feel pain? What is that about, you know? And minimize it, trivialize it. So I think that could be one aspect of it, but I think it's also the awareness through the media, to the various media channels. Was there another aspect to that question, or have I?
I think you've covered it. Yes.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Ms. Prasad, your presentation stimulated quite a bit of discussion, and I have a couple of questions for you. Can insecure childhood attachment work in the reverse? That is, lead to an adult withdrawing from almost all forms of relationships and having difficulty creating or maintaining such relationships?
Yes, the answer is yes, because as you would have realized, the foundation, that what attachment does is that it's teaching the child from early that the world is a place that's safe and we can trust and rely on others. Now, when that doesn't happen, it causes us to be distrustful of everyone around us. So it is not uncommon for persons to just make that vow to say that I do not want to have a relationship, I don't want to get involved with anybody like that, and isolate. So it's not uncommon for that to happen. It's very, very likely.
And another one was, how does a young woman abandoned by her verbally abusive father recover from such insecure attachment, resulting in dependence in relationships?
Okay, so that is just one of the ways in which these emotional wounds occur. There are many cases here in Jamaica, and we're all trying to heal in some way. So to address that particular question, we have a team here, the Church-Site Counselling Initiative. We have trained professionals who have the skill set to work on helping you to reach a place of healing. So whether it is just that one instance, but that's just one, there are many cases where we are emotionally wounded because of the insecure attachments. So I'd just encourage that person to get the help today, because we're all a work in progress.
And a final question for you. Is the idea that if your partner doesn't beat you, he doesn't love you, is that an example of insecure attachment?
Yes, it is. And we saw that as one of the consequences, where these persons, they would have learned from their caregivers that if maybe they were even witnesses of domestic violence, they saw their parents doing the same thing, and the child learns that, okay, this is how love is shown. And so they accept it, they accept this behavior, or they think it's an okay behavior. So the answer is yes, that's a very good example of how insecure attachment, which cause emotional wounds, impact us in that way in our relationships.
Okay. And this question is for Ms. Mayer. And it says, please give examples of what can be done to help cope with or redirect boys' anger at an early age.
Okay. As I said, the first thing is to understand what is happening with them, all right, in terms of the fact that their levels are a little higher. So the very first thing is that you cannot react to it with aggression. So you have to remain calm, right? And so as you remain calm, then you can, for example, let's say that they were playing and you recognize that the anger is building and so forth, right? You don't react, you remain calm. And then you sit with that boy, for example, and you can ask a question. You can ask and say, you know, what happened? So try and find out what was the immediate action before the anger took place, right? What happened before? Because more than likely, the anger is going to be related to an event that just happened, for example. So was it that they were playing and the other sibling took away the toy, right? So that is one. Secondly, validate that feeling. So if it is, for example, that the other sibling took away their toy, you know, validate to say, you know, I can understand why you would be upset that, you know, Johnny took away your toy, right? Children, even at an early age, they need to feel as if there's a sense of justice for them, right? So you validate that feeling and then you take steps to correct any injustice that was done. So again, if it is that, you know, Johnny did something wrong and took away the toy, then you address it, and so that that child can see that you are actually doing something to address his particular need that caused the anger in the first place. Because we need to understand that anger many times is the outward sign that there is a particular need that was not met by the child, and you are now trying to meet that need.
Sorry, may I also add, because I think Ms. Mayer definitely laid the foundation. I just want to also go a little bit into the adolescents when they are angry, how to redirect them. A very important thing is to get them connecting back with whether it is school system, some sort of community mentoring program, but get them engaged in something, because a lot of times when they're angry, they have just totally alienated themselves. They're disengaged from the systems that are there, and it's to try and see how to work with the systems. And it's not an easy thing, because a lot of this, as Ms. Mayer demonstrated earlier in the graph with Maslow, etc., these things build on each other. So if you start from early, you know, then it's easier for them to engage with the extracurricular activities that she mentioned, rather than wait until they're teenagers and say, but you're not doing anything with your life, you need to get into a club. Get them engaged in the extracurricular from early. Get them engaged in their schoolwork from early. Don't wait until exam and say, I don't want you to go to a bad school. No, these things have to start from early and build, so that by the time they get into the adolescent, where they're likely to withdraw, you have them already engaging in the various systems.
And thank you for that. And a final one, Ms. Mayer. Given the recognition and acknowledgement of the link between emotional wounds and aggressive, violent behavior, how can research and intervention start to be reflected in policies and programs to help boys, men, and other perpetrators of violence? And how can we start to help men who are themselves victims of domestic violence so badly affected by stereotyping?
Okay, that is a mouthful of a question, but I'm going to see if I can break it down. honestly, I mean, that individual mentioned policies. So if we're talking about policies, we're talking about in terms of things and strategies that the government can put in place to sort of direct how we can begin to help our boys. I think first and foremost, it has to start with parenting. I think that there is a need for some policy to be put in place to help our parents. For example, when persons become pregnant, is there something that we can put in place? Can we put a program in place? There needs to be a program in place where our prospective parents can get training in parenting, right? So they can suggest that, okay, you need to do 4 weeks of a parenting session at this particular organization or that particular organization. So I would say that needs to be in policy, because even though we have it now, so for example, the churches are doing parenting. We have our organization, for example, that is doing parenting seminars. But the truth is, it's persons who are interested who come to these seminars. And a lot of times we miss the vast majority of our parents in society. So I really think that there needs to be something in policy. The government has to put something in place to say, look, once you become pregnant and you're going to have a child, once you have your child, this is what needs to be done. This is where you need to go to get your parenting training. So it starts with that. I believe also in the schools, education, we can put something in place in our curriculum, right? I know that I think there's a subject that is done in school. I don't remember the exact name of it, but I think it has something to do with home and family. I think that there should be something within that curriculum that can also address these issues as it pertains to, raising our boys and addressing their needs, right? We also are talking about the various programs. Dr. Pottinger, Professor Pottinger mentioned it. Mentoring. How can we make mentoring something that is not just, the church has it and a few places have it, but how can we incorporate mentoring in a more wide scale way in our society? A lot of our boys, for example, do not have fathers in the home. How can we make mentoring more accessible to them on a wider scale? And of course, our males, our adult males now, who have been emotionally wounded. Again, it's going to come down to organizations, NGOs, coming together to see if they can put on programs, seminars, have more support groups for these men who have been emotionally wounded. For example, if in terms of domestic violence, when they come through, whether it is the police system, something can be put in place that, if something is logged, that they are directed to somewhere that they can get this support, right? So it really is a lot to be done, but those are some of the things that I would say needs to be now put in place.
Thank you. And just to end, the person who asked that question said that the program you were referring to is Health and Family Life Education.
Yes, thank you.
I would like to say that in terms of our men who are experiencing domestic violence, are the victims of domestic violence, one of the things that we have to look at, and I think it comes back to policy, is how do we make it okay for these people to seek help through organizations such as ours, the Church-Site Counselling Initiative, because until they are able to feel that it will be safe to expose themselves to someone with the idea that they have been a victim of domestic violence, they will not be able to get the help that they need. Well, thank you all so much for your very interesting and very, very informative questions that teased out great answers. And I'm now going to turn it over to Dr. Pottinger, who will do the final presentation at this point.
Right, thank you. So you've all heard our presenters speak passionately about their topic. We have one last one to do, so thank you for remaining with us, and we are very good with time. We're going to just sort of now wrap up by looking at the oases that I spoke to you about, because we all experience turmoil and stress at some time, and particularly those who are emotionally wounded from trauma can feel overwhelmed. And so our final session is really just looking at what are some of the suggestions we can make, we can suggest, we can propose in terms of how to take care of self and how to soothe. To lead us into that session, we're just going to pause for a bit and listen to another violin piece by Miss Boyd. Finding our oases, caring for self to soothe the emotional wounds. First, let's look at a definition of self-care. We should know it. It refers to any wholesome activity that helps to improve our well-being and happiness. So it could be listening to soothing music, like what we just did, or uplifting music, watching a feel-good movie, turning off your cell for a specified time, quiet meditating, a good physical workout. And if you notice, all of these examples are activities done by self, for self. But some of us find it difficult to care for self, particularly women who have been brought up to care for others, whether it's their spouse, children, siblings, parents, and so they often neglect self. Jesus has given us several examples of the importance of self-care. We find these in Mark 6, verse 31, Luke 5, 15 to 16, when he took time to withdraw, to rest, to eat, to pray. He took care of his needs. Although self-care will not heal woundedness, it can provide relief from emotional turmoil and pain and minimize further damage. So we're now going to look at self-care under 4 headings. 1, becoming more aware of our emotions and feelings. Then caring for our mental health, caring for our physical health, and caring for our interpersonal well-being. What we realize is that once we begin to tune in more to ourselves, just become a lot more aware, we become better at recognizing when we need to self-care. And some ways to increase that awareness is talk to people you trust, talk to close friends, family members who know you well, who you trust, who can be a source of information and can indicate about something about your emotional wellness, how they're seeing you. Be vigilant and pay attention to yourself, to your responses, link them to your feelings and thoughts. So for example, you could just sort of pause and wonder, why did I react like that? What thought drove that response? Then label the feelings and identify any associated thoughts. Meditate, reflect. And if you find that when you're meditating, your thoughts are centering around self-shaming, self-harming, needing forgiveness, whether it is from yourself or from God, this may be signaling a need for you to be more compassionate to yourself and to care for your emotional health. Now, in this light, we're going to do a little activity, very brief quiz I'm encouraging everyone to take, which can just be an indication of your state of emotional wellness or woundedness. So no one is going to see these responses. You can be as honest as you can. Just take a piece of paper and pen or use your phone to make the notes. And what we're going to do is I'm going to present a list of feelings. Some will be positive, some will be negative. And all I'm asking is for you to think over the past month and just kind of rate how often you have been feeling the different feelings. So think of the different activities and experiences you have engaged in over the past month, and then assign a number. And these are the feelings. I'm going to show you them now. Assign a number, whether it is contented, which is the first feeling, and you're saying, well, I would say over the past month I felt that frequently, so your score would be 4. Or if you've said, boy, over the past month, never, have not really been feeling contented, your score will be 1. So at this point, I'm going to ask you to pause, participate, score your feelings, rate them, and then we look at what the scores indicate in terms of interpretation. Okay. Now I want you to add the sum, the scores that you gave to all of the positive feelings, which are numbers 1, 4, 5, 8, 9, 10, 12, and 14. 1, 4, 5, 8, 9, 10, 12, and 14. So add the numbers you gave to the positive feelings and total that, write down your total score for that. Then next, add the numbers to what you've given to the negative feelings, numbers 2, 3, 6, 7, 11, 13, 15, 16. 2, 3, 6, 7, 11, 13, 15, and 16. And write down the total that you've given for that. Now, what you're going to do is just calculate the difference between the two totals. You're going to take away the negative feelings from your positive feelings score. subtract your negative feelings from your positive feelings score. And please know that you can get a negative score. So write down the minus sign if you have a negative score. You'll get a negative score if your total for your negative feelings is greater than your total for your positive feelings. Okay, now having subtracted the negative total score from the positive total score, let's look at what is being suggested. So if you got a score of 16 or higher, the highest you can get is 32. If you got a score of 16 or higher, that is suggesting a good dominance of positive feelings, which could be suggesting you're in an emotionally well place. If you've gotten a score of 16 or higher, particularly if your score is 24 or higher, then you're really in a good emotionally secure place. If you've gotten a score between 5 and 15, somewhat positive, but you're still on the positive side, so that's good. Okay, so that would indicate a somewhat positive overall score. Now a score less than 4, so it would be 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, -1, -2, -3. A score between 4 and -3 means you're neither in the positive vein or the negative vein, you're neutral, which is not a good place to be. You really should be more on the positive side. So if you find that your score is between 4 to -3, it means that you need to be considering what activities you're engaging in that is resulting, or experiences resulting in the overwhelming balance of negative feelings. And then anyone who has a total, when you've subtracted a total score where it's a negative, it's a minus, it means that your negative feelings are really dominating. This could suggest that you're carrying emotional wounds that are influencing your emotional well-being, and particularly if your score is -24 to -32, that's just too much negativity, and it really should be indicating that there is something that you could be doing to create more of a balance in your life. All right, so let us now go into some suggestions, looking at the various systems. Mental, we're going to start with first. And because we are looking at emotional wounded, the focus will be on that, but can impact, the suggestions can be taken by persons who are not wounded and really just need to figure out how to sort of de-stress and be a lot more emotionally mindful. First thing is, it's important for us to focus on the present, center ourselves in the present. When we worry about the future, what is going to happen down the road, or when we keep reflecting and reviewing past trauma, it prevents you from living in the present. And it's important for us to remain in the present. That is the only place we can be where we can take care of ourselves. And just as an aside, June month, I knew was going to be a very difficult month for me. Just various tasks, various things that I have to get done. And so I kept thinking of it. And when I kept thinking down the road of the different things that I needed to get done, I felt my anxiety ramping up. I felt the tension, etc. And a simple thing I did to just sort of center me back in the present is to hum. And I found myself since last week, over this week, humming Massa God, God. Because we sang that song in church on Sunday, and I find that just soothes me and centers me and keeps me in the present. So our aim is to remain in that present where we can take care of our emotional needs. Forgive. That's my second suggestion. We need to forgive those who we feel have wronged us. Forgive is such an important part of our mental health. When we do not forgive, it blocks mental health. There are too many times that we're stuck in holding on to the anger, the revenge thoughts, because we're just unable to forgive who we feel have wronged us. And that when we hold on to that anger, it destroys our emotional wellness. A third suggestion is be clear about what you value. When we're wounded, because of our wounds, we may focus on how others value us. And therefore, we're going to lose sight of our worth, what we think about ourselves, our value. Do not focus on how others see us. Reorient yourself, focus on, center yourself on your value, your worth. And another one is having an attitude of gratitude beats all. Focus on what you're grateful for. When you're going through the traumatic memories or even encountering new traumatic experiences, an attitude of gratitude will carry you through those occurrences. Physical self-care is so important to our emotional wellness. And Dr. Herlock mentioned some of these, but I'm sure in other seminars, other fora, you have heard people speak about exercise, diet, sleep. We can't all be wrong. It's so important that we need to focus on a lot of those three key activities. But particularly when we're wounded, I find rhythmic exercising is important because it helps to center us. And rhythmic is like running. There's a beat, there's a rhythm. Swimming, dancing. The rhythmic exercising relaxes us. It keeps us in the present. Again, when we're wounded, when we're stressed out, we need to be careful about the foods we eat because some foods put our mood on a roller coaster. And the main culprit is sugar. If we binge on a lot of sugary, sweet things, binge on chocolate, etc., we get an initial little high, and then we plunge low. So we need to be very careful about that because sometimes we're eating the sugar to get the high, but we're going to plunge. And caffeine, drinking a lot of coffee does the same thing. Alcohol, it gives us initial buzz, but we're going to plunge. So we need to be very careful about the foods that put our moods on roller coaster, particularly when we're stressed out or we're wounded. Sunshine. We have the sun naturally. We don't even need to create it. Some countries do. We get vitamin D from the sun, which is important for our mental health, our mental well-being. In countries like Northern Europe, where they do not have sun for a long period of time, a lot of persons there are diagnosed with the acronym SAD, Seasonal Affective Disorder. And that is because they're not getting a lot of sunshine. And I say that because one of the topical common types of therapy to treat SAD is putting them on the light therapy because they're trying to use the light to mimic sun. So we get vitamin D from sun. I know sometimes the sun beats down on us and we're annoyed with it, etc. But we need to recognize that it is beneficial to our mental health. And even if it's just a little bits we get from it. And then, of course, we know about sleep. You know, without good quality sleep, our mental health is at risk. I don't even think I need to say anything more there. Interpersonal self-care. As you've been hearing, being emotionally wounded affects our relationships. So we need to be thinking of how to take care of our relationships, how to focus on building relationships or maintaining relationships that keep us feeling good, you know, that put us in a good place. And one of the suggestions is practice saying no to demanding persons. No, saying no is about setting boundaries and being assertive. Traumatic grief may cause us to feel vulnerable and wanting to please. And there's nothing wrong with helping others, but not at the expense of your well-being. And you heard Dr. Herlock say that when she connected it with the heart and physical ailments. So we need to learn to say no. Ask for help when you need it. Sometimes after trauma, we shut others out, we push them away. But we can only succeed when we interact with people. We need to know how and when to ask others for help. And a big one, is the toxic relationships that we may sometimes need to let go of. Those relationships that contribute to us feeling bad about ourselves, or those that drain our energy. And a toxic relationship can be a spousal relationship, it can be a parent-child one, it could be a friendship. So there are some relationships that we may not be able to offload fully because of the person who we are relating with. But if we cannot offload, then at least try and engage in moderation with the person. So at least you're getting some breaks. So you're not just constantly being faced with the toxicity. Self-care also involves knowing when caring for our emotional well-being is becoming too much for us. There is nothing to be ashamed of when we realize that we're not able to take care of our emotional well-being. This is when we need to reach out for mental health help, and that is a sign of strength and maturity. But particularly, if you know someone has had a traumatic experience and they are suffering from severe fear, anxiety, depression, anger, sleep disturbance, encourage them to get help. If they are abusive, if they're unable to form close, satisfying friendships and relationships, encourage them to get help. If they're living with terrifying memories of the trauma, nightmares, flashbacks, or they're engaging in self-destructive habits, alcohol, binging, marijuana, smoking, etc., deliberate self-destructive or unintentional self-destructive habits, encourage them to get help. Generally, if you're having trouble functioning well in your home space, school, work, you may be emotionally wounded and may benefit from seeking help. And so I just want to end with, do not leave your emotional wellness to chance, particularly when you're carrying emotional wounds. Be deliberate about scheduling me time to take care of your mental, physical, and interpersonal well-being. Thank you.